This is a certified hood classic.
So, I am finally back after a much-needed break. It ended up being a little longer than I anticipated, but I am here now, and that's what matters.
Hey,
While on this break, I rewatched my Psychology of Cartman video and felt the urge to do a similar video about a different character, since there are so many psychologically complex characters in this show. So, let's go ahead and do it.
Facts.
Also, if you like this
okay, and we're done.
video,
That is
feel
the video
free to
for
subscribe.
today.
Thank you. Now, when you think of offensive TV shows, you probably think of South Park. Consequently, when you think of offensive TV characters, you probably think of Cartman. And while Cartman is a safe pick in deciding who the most offensive character on TV is, I find safety to be boring.
Yeah.
Oh, but he killed... This is you, by the way. Oh, but he killed someone's parents and fed them to him. Yeah, well, that's nice and all, and this may be a hot take, but I don't believe that Cartman is the most offensive character on TV.
Hell no, you know good and well is Mr. Garrison, bro. Big facts, bro. You know that man is weird, boy. That man went to Canada and F'd the Prime Minister to death.
TV. In fact, he's not even the most offensive on South Park. That honor is reserved for the man who said some of the most absurdly prejudiced and derogatory sentences ever aired on television. The man whose opinions and beliefs will shift radically. The man who pushes his beliefs to the absolute extreme only for his own self-interest.
I remember that episode.
Mr. Garrison. Mr. Garrison is by far one of the most psychologically complex characters in South Park, and while Cartman may be more so, Garrison is different because while Cartman's actions are more or less tied to his narcissism, Garrison seems to have several different psychological disorders all acting at once. So what exactly is the cause of Garrison's intense personality changes, his incredibly contradicting and radical beliefs, and why does he talk to a puppet as if it's alive? Well, with the intro out of the way, let's get into it. The complicated psychology of the most offensive character on TV. So first I need to say that I am not a psychologist and this video is just for fun. Also, in describing these illnesses and disorders, please remember that this is still a cartoon and there are plenty of people in the real world that are affected by these conditions. And just because I label Mr. Garrison as having one of these conditions does not mean that those that have it in the real world are anything like Mr. Garrison. Right. So with that out of the way, let's cue Psychiatrist Blooms.
I'm gonna smack you little bitches.
Mr. Garrison is one of the earliest characters we are introduced to in the show, first appearing in the pilot as the teacher of the 3rd grade class.
Bro, look at South Park from this perspective, bro. Like, look how, like, it was legit, like, like construction paper type shit, bro. Like, even, like, I even love the South Park with the, like, realistic pictures in the background. That was the shit, bro. And that's hilarious. It's crazy to see how we, like, went from that to, like, this real digital, real, like, you know, real nice, polished South Park, man. They've been through a lot, bro.
At first, he seems relatively normal, outside of the fact that he is an absolutely horrible teacher whose curriculum seems to revolve more around sitcoms than anything related to school.
Okay.
We also get to meet Mr. Hat, his teaching aide who is a puppet that he voices. So, initially, he just seems to
Hey, he said on that bit, he said, no, you go to hell. You go to hell and you die.
Be an incompetent teacher who is a bit strange. But as we quickly find out, Mr. Hat has a much more sinister side to him.
Hell yeah,
in the very next episode, when Mr. Garrison learns that Kathy Lee Gifford is visiting South Park, he begins to talk to Mr. Hat alone about his trauma in losing to Kathy Lee Gifford in a talent show when he was a child. Now, talking to an inanimate object is not necessarily indicative of any sort of mental illness, and if it helps Mr. Garrison process his trauma, then I don't see anything inherently wrong with that.
That
the problem comes when Mr. Hat is revealed to have a personality of his own and begins suggesting to Mr. Garrison that he needs to kill Kathy Lee Gifford. Yeah, that just might indicate that something is off.
Yeah.
As the episode continues,
a grown man with a hand up a puppet's ass is definitely something wrong with you.
Mr. Hat continues to urge Mr. Garrison to kill Kathy Lee, with Mr. Garrison continuously refusing. When he gets fired from directing the school play, Mr. Hat urges him once again, and Mr. Garrison relents and tells Mr. Hat that he needs to be the one to do it. He goes about planning, and when Kathy Lee comes to town, he begins his plan. Just as he's about to take the shot, Stan and Wendy break in and try to talk him out of it. Mr. Garrison eventually decides that they're right and decides not to do it. However, Mr. Hat decides that it must be done, and he takes the shot.
The bitch must die!
He ends up missing and accidentally kills Kenny. You bastard. No. Mr. Hat is then sent to a mental hospital where Mr. Garrison is forced to follow because you know, he's a puppet. So, with this episode,
the fact that I wonder if they locked up Mr. Hat like with the straitjacket because that's like Mr. Garrison's alter ego, alternate personality, whatever you want to call it. So they just said, all right, look, if we lock up Mr. Garrison, Mr. Hat will be free to do what he wants. You know what I'm saying? So let's just lock up Mr. Hat to like punish him. You know what I'm saying? Kind of thing.
We get our first look into the darker side of Mr. Garrison's
Damn, she
psyche.
went on a lawsuit.
It's
for
likely
that shit?
pretty obvious to everyone by now, but we can confidently make our first diagnosis. Mr. Garrison appears to be suffering from dissociative identity disorder, previously known as multiple personality disorder. This disorder is characterized by switching between
Like
alternate
schizophrenic.
identities. These identities often have names, history, and characteristics distinct from the person's true identity. They will often have distinct voices and mannerisms. All of these characteristics can be seen within Mr. Hat, as his personality, actions, and voice are all very different from Mr. Garrison.
It happened again, didn't it? Now we do things my way. I can't kill her, Mr. Hat.
So yeah, it's pretty safe to say that Mr. Garrison is suffering from dissociative identity disorder. And throughout the early seasons of the show, this was a major part of his character. Also throughout these early seasons, Mr. Garrison is occasionally accused by others in town of being gay. He hates these accusations and in response is often incredibly homophobic.
Well, gay people are evil. Evil right down to their cold black hearts, which pump not blood like yours and mine, but rather a thick, vomitous oil that oozes through their rotten veins and clots in their pea-sized brains, which becomes the cause of their Nazi-esque patterns of violent behavior.
He would also constantly talk about how much he loved women, specifically women and women only. This makes it pretty clear to both the audience and everyone in town that Mr. Garrison is a closeted gay man who is unwilling to accept his true identity. These two seemingly
everybody knew too, bro. Everybody knew except for him, apparently. No, he knew.
Separate parts of Mr. Garrison's psyche are first identified as possibly related in the Season 2 episode Summer Sucks. When Mr. Garrison loses Mr. Hat, he begins to experience a mental breakdown, being unable to continue life without Mr. Hat. Later in the episode, he decides to visit a psychiatrist to try to sort out his mental health. The psychiatrist immediately asks Mr. Garrison if he is gay, to which Mr. Garrison is offended by the question. He does say, however, that sometimes Mr. Hat would fantasize about same-sex relations.
Sometimes Mr. Hat liked to pretend he was in a sauna with Brett Favre and a
No, boy, that was your ass, boy. All them marker dots on your face, boy.
Thousand Island dressing.
That I did not need to know.
With this, the psychiatrist is easily able to identify that Mr. Garrison is the one who is gay, but because he's in denial, he acts out his gay persona through Mr. Hat, who is trying to come out. Mr. Garrison entirely refutes this, and the psychiatrist is killed by a giant snake. Not the animal, the firework. It's a whole thing from the episode. I'm not going to explain it. Having still not found Mr.
If you want to check it out, man, make sure you watch that on the channel, man. We got all the episodes on the channel, man. Make sure you watch
Mr. Hat, and having still not accepted what the psychiatrist told him, Mr. Garrison introduces his replacement for Mr. Hat, Mr. Twig. Mr. Twig essentially plays the same role as Mr. Hat, however he does have a slightly different personality, thus we can identify him as a new personality within Mr. Garrison's dissociative identity disorder. If you look closely at Mr. Twig, you may also notice this symbol, which was used to identify gay prisoners during a certain time period in Germany. It's a small detail, but it shows that perhaps Mr. Garrison has subconsciously accepted what the psychiatrist told him, despite not being willing to admit it to himself. Mr. Twig remains Mr. Garrison's teaching assistant for 6 more episodes, despite the children asking for Mr. Hat to return. Mr. Garrison gets extremely defensive when Mr. Hat is brought up, demanding that his name never be said again. Throughout the episode Chef Aid, Mr. Twig's life is on the line, as he is continuously attacked and injured by someone. Mr. Garrison goes to the police to find the attacker.
That dude is fucking crazy, bro. He is crazy, bro. To put that twig, to sit there with the boiling water, he got a pot. That man got a pot. He put water in the pot, put the pot on the stove, turn up the shit to high. You had to hear the click. You heard when he was like, and it lights. He had to listen to sit through that, go in the room, sit, watch TV until that shit boil, and then come back in the room and act excited. And I mean, surprised. That boy, and shit, boy, like, bro, you know what you did, bro. You knew what you did, stupid ass.
But he is stopped when he finds an old friend in his closet, Mr. Hat. He berates Mr. Hat for his
What the
attempt
hell
to
going
return
on, man?
when he is interrupted by several people from the town. This turns out to be a sort of intervention, and they arrest Mr. Garrison. For some reason, I don't know why. While in jail, his cellmate is Chef, who again explains that the puppets are just Mr. Garrison and that they're not actually alive. Again, Mr. Garrison doesn't listen. Now, this is when the whole multiple personality theory gets even more complicated, as Mr. Garrison is broken out of prison, and it's revealed that the person breaking him out was Mr. Hat. At the end of the episode...
Now that was crazy. How the hell did Mr. Hat break him out of jail, bro? And that boy is a puppet, bro.
Mr. Garrison throws out Mr. Stick and returns to Mr. Hat. Now, this seems to suggest that Mr. Hat is actually some kind of living being independent of Mr. Garrison, so it kind of throws a wrench in the whole theory that we've developed. However, due to this event and some others that take place later in the show, I don't believe that Mr. Hat is truly independent of Garrison. It seems as though Mr. Hat does have some kind of power over the user. For example, when Satan picks him up at the end of the movie, he begins to talk in almost the exact same voice as Mr. Garrison. However, Mr. Garrison's use of Mr. Twig seems to show that he does indeed have these split personalities, as Mr. Twig has shown no indication of any independence. So while Mr. Hat may have some sort of influence on the user, it doesn't necessarily negate the dissociative identity disorder. You know, that's really hard for me to say. It's kind of a tongue twister, so I'm just going to start saying DID instead. While it's obvious that Mr. Garrison has many of the symptoms of DID, to ensure that this diagnosis is correct, we need to identify the cause of this. Research has shown that those with this disorder are often victims of childhood trauma, with statistics stating that up to 99% of those with this disorder experience some form of trauma during their childhood. We've already discussed some of the possible causes of this earlier in the video. However, in Mr. Garrison's case, we can see how this trauma still manifests itself in his everyday life.
There was my uncle, Richard. He molested me.
When was that?
Saturday. Last Saturday.
Boy, you a fucking weird ass dude.
Following
bruh.
the South Park movie and the beginning of season 4, Mr. Hat begins to
Hey, dude, I think you a little further behind than us, bro. You might have to update the live.
appear much less frequently. This means that his symptoms of DID begin to appear much less frequently as well. Because of this, Mr. Garrison was forced to finally confront the true cause of his issues. Denial is a river in Egypt. It's actually one of the biggest rivers in the world. It's pretty cool. The show makes it pretty obvious that Mr. Garrison is gay. Of course, this is obvious to everyone except for Mr. Garrison, who is totally unwilling to accept the truth. This denial is likely the cause of his personality disorder. Though we don't directly see any trauma Garrison experienced as a child, besides the whole Kathy Lee thing, it's likely that growing up as flamboyant as he is meant a lot of bullying and discrimination from other kids.
Yeah, because that nigga was bald head and old at a young age, bro. Who the fuck gets a bald head? Whoa, hold on now. What the hell is this? That's a part, but it looks a little less dark.
Perhaps leading him to develop this other personality, where he would channel all of his gay tendencies as a way to separate his gay side from himself. The only real evidence we have of Mr. Garrison's homosexual tendencies at a young age comes from season 3 when Garrison visits his parents. It's clear that he has some kind of trauma related to his father, but we aren't aware of the nature of this trauma until Garrison confronts him. Okay, with YouTube being way stricter on demonetization lately, I kind of have to figure out a way to say this that is PG, so let me think.
He touched him!
Mr. Garrison is upset because his father never violated him as a child. Is that okay? I hope so. But yeah, Mr. Garrison's trauma comes not from being violated as a child, but rather not being violated by his father. In his incredibly warped view of the world, this meant his father didn't love him. Now listen, in the real world, this subject matter is not funny. It's a serious issue, and there is absolutely nothing funny about it.
No, right, but in South Park, that shit is hilarious. So, why didn't you touch me, Dad? And Mom, you knew. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. I was like, what? I know his dad was like, are y'all fucking serious?
Now, with that being said, in this context, it's pretty hilarious. I mean, come on, okay, I'm sorry. And while this mindset from Mr. Garrison shows his gay tendencies from a young age, it also has implications with his mental health that we'll talk about later.
Too.
But his denial of his sexuality may have led him down some very dark paths, including in the episode Cartman Joins Nambla, when he meets up with Cartman after chatting with him online. Despite his claims that these were the
Mr.
actions
Hat
of
got a
Mr.
trench
Hat,
coat
he
on.
was arrested and fired from his teaching job. During his hiatus from teaching, he decides to pursue a career in romance novels. While writing his first novel,
we
with the
haven't
help
got
of
there
Mr.
yet.
Hat, he struggles when writing about the women in the book, but he seems to have no issue going into graphic detail about the men in the book. His novel later won an award for Best Homoerotic Novel.
No, this is what we in the book publishing business like to call gay. Really, really gay.
And this is when he finally snapped, causing him to have a full-on mental breakdown. He moved into the mountains to live as a hermit. When the 4th grade teacher wants to talk to him, she climbs up the mountains to try to find him. When she does find him, he is so paranoid about the gay rumors that he continuously refutes them unprompted.
Do you know what it is to be a teacher, miss?
Joke's on Dick.
No, I don't. It's a lie.
This dude is a freak.
He eventually
bro.
walks into the Tree of Insight, where he is finally confronted by his gay side. He tells himself that he has to finally admit to being gay, as it is the cause of all of his confusion and trouble in life. He is hesitant at first, but eventually is finally able to admit that he is gay, and that it feels good. He returns to the school and
He is so
excitedly proclaims his gayness. They are all very happy for him, until he suggests that he wants to start teaching again. Then they tell him that they don't hire gay people. Despite this, he is later told that he is allowed to be a teacher, but he has been demoted to kindergarten.
Right, you gotta
But
work
with
his way
that,
back
Mr.
up.
Garrison has finally accepted his true self and is able to move past the issues he's had in the past. After this, any signs of DID in Mr. Garrison are basically non-existent. So it seems like he's really turned his life around. It's like we're seeing the true Mr. Garrison for the first time, and from here on out, I'm confident that he is cleared of any mental health condition and has finally found a stable identity. Right?
Nope.
Now that Mr. Garrison has finally come out and formed an identity, we begin to see the development of the tendencies that would shape his character going forward. If there's one thing you should know about Mr. Garrison from this point on, it's that he takes everything to the extreme. It is impossible for him to be neutral on virtually any topic. Whenever he becomes interested in a topic, there are two options. Either it is the only thing he cares about and he makes it his entire personality, or he despises it so much that he dedicates his life to destroying it. His homosexuality is where we see the early signs of this. He is really, really gay. And I don't mean that in a, I don't care what they do, as long as they don't do it around me way. I mean it in a, he performed the rubber mouth technique to a room full of kindergartners way. This extreme homosexuality is a common theme for the next few seasons. In a later episode, he creates a machine that allows the user to travel at record speed. However, the way you steer the device is, once again, really gay. But where he really takes it to another level is in the Season 6 episode, The Death Camp of Tolerance, when he is promoted to 4th grade teacher.
Oh my God.
He discovers that the school couldn't fire him for being gay, since other cases have led to lawsuits where the victim was awarded millions of dollars.
Dude,
Upon
you don't
learning
want to
this,
know.
he immediately makes it his mission to be fired for being gay. He introduces Mr. Slave as his new teaching assistant, and this leads to actions that are so graphic I can't talk about them on YouTube.
No, for real.
All you really need to know is that they involve Mr. Slave, a glass tube, and a gerbil. I'll leave it at that for
Jeff, hey Jeff,
now.
that's your avenue
Granted,
right
these
there.
actions
Jeff.
were done with a goal in mind, but it still highlights the
What?
extreme nature of his behavior. Then, in Season 7, he attempts to kill the men from the TV show Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, since he
what's
believes
up,
it's
man?
essentially causing the appropriation of gay culture. They turned out to be evil crab people anyway, so I guess it all worked out. So what do all of these extreme actions prove about his psychology? Right now it just seems like he's really passionate, maybe a little bit too passionate, about his sexuality. That doesn't necessarily indicate any sort of mental health concerns. Well, that all changes with the Season 9 premiere, because now, out of nowhere, he's not gay, he's a woman. Mr. Garrison undergoes a sex change operation and is no longer Mr. Garrison, but
He was trying to bump coochies with females, bro.
rather Mrs. Garrison. Just wanted to say real quick, I actually planned on calling him Mrs. Garrison for the entirety of his time as a woman.
Right.
I even had it written in the script and everything, but I realized it is incredibly confusing for me, and I definitely would have messed it up anyways, so I'm just going to refer to him as Mr. Garrison for the rest of the video, so I'm sorry if that upsets you, but it just makes it so much easier.
Bro, I mean, at this point, just call him Mr. Garrison because that's his name, bro. Like Mr. Garrison is his name, and as we talking about a character 2 and 3, he goes back to being the man. He didn't want to be a woman, so it's safe to say that his identity wants to be Mr. Garrison. So we could call him.
This is now the second time that we can observe an extreme shift in Mr. Garrison's
He was
identity.
like the first
Since
South Park
the moment he steps
transgender,
out of
bro.
that operating room, he is the most womanly woman of all time. All he talks about is girl stuff and being a woman, to the point where everyone around him is immediately tired of it. It also demonstrates a severe lack of knowledge on his part, as his idea of womanhood is based on stereotypes and cliches that your average Andrew Tate fan would read to themselves as morning affirmations.
Hey, no, we don't. Hey, shit, I like Andrew Tate, and I don't do that shit. Get in the kitchen and cook. Okay,
It also
I'm
demonstrates
just joking. I'm just
total-
joking. Okay.
Oh my! It also shows just how impulsive of a decision this was, as
is
he doesn't
going
even
on here?
understand the basic anatomy of a trans woman, thinking that he's pregnant, despite this clearly being impossible. He didn't even tell his boyfriend, Mr. Slave, that he was getting the procedure done, causing him to leave her. Here we see another major personality shift, as he immediately begins shouting homophobic slurs at him when he leaves. So now, in just the span of an episode, we have seen 2 major identity shifts within Garrison. Keep that in mind. Once he realizes that he's still not biologically a woman, he doesn't even want to be one anymore. However, it's too late to reverse the procedure, and he decides that he's okay with staying a woman.
That boy got a badge.
So where does that leave us now on the Garrison timeline? So first we have straight homophobic man, and then gay man, and then extremely gay man, and then trans woman, and now homophobic trans woman.
Oh my
Now,
God.
obviously it's normal for people's identities and beliefs to change over time, but
Nasty on
changes
that.
this drastic in this short of a time span show that there may be something else at play psychologically. And this leads us into our next diagnosis. Now, examining this behavior.
Wait, hold on, bro. Does Mr. Garrison still have Mr. Hat, bro? Like, does he still have Mr. Hat or no? I haven't seen a new episode in so long, bro.
My first thought was that this may be bipolar disorder, which is characterized by mood swings ranging from depressive lows to manic highs. It was mainly the manic part that seemed to align to me, as a lot of Garrison's behavior aligned with a manic episode, including risky behavior, irritability, and hypersexuality. However, I struggled to find evidence outside of these characteristics, so I didn't feel confident in that diagnosis. After some more research, I realized that a different disorder aligned much better with Garrison's tendencies. The diagnosis that I decided on was borderline personality disorder. According to Cleveland Clinic,
BPD.
borderline personality disorder, or BPD, is characterized by extreme mood fluctuations, instability in interpersonal relationships, and impulsivity.
Yes, he was.
Right away,
bro.
it would seem that Mr. Garrison fits this description, but to be sure, we're going to go through the diagnostic criteria for BPD. These next few episodes are some of the best evidence we have to support our diagnosis, so I'll list the criteria as they come up. Afterwards, we'll look at his previous behavior as well and see how it aligns with the criteria.
It's all fucked up.
So later in season 9, Garrison decides that he wants to get back together with Mr. Slave and visits him to apologize.
Right.
He quickly learns that Mr. Slave has moved on and is getting married
to
to
Big Gay Al.
This enrages Garrison, and he instantly switches from apologetic and kind to screaming homophobic slurs at both of them. This, along with his previous behavior, shows a pattern that is evidence enough to check off 2 of our criteria: intense, inappropriate rage and emotional instability in day-to-day life.
Man,
in BPD, this
he is
emotional
really
volatility
fucked up.
is usually episodic,
problem.
only lasting for a few hours and rarely lasting longer than a few days. And as we will see, his anger doesn't last very long. But his unstable emotions are not only related to rage, as we've seen him switch from sad or angry to happy and excited several times.
True.
So now, his view of gay people has once again shifted to the opposite extreme, and
Bro, my thing is, bro, you got that whole sex change. You ain't think about doing something with your top part, bro, your hair, bro. Something, bro. Add on a Donald Trump flap or something. Like, look at your shit, bro. What?
and he not only leads the charge in blocking the gay marriage bill, but even tries to get his followers to beat up gay people. Throughout the episode, he goes to even more extreme lengths to prevent the bill, but in the end, his efforts are futile as the bill passes anyways. The whole relationship with Mr. Slave, along with future relationships,
Like
are
strong
evidence
as
of
hell.
another diagnostic criteria, A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by extremes between idealization and devaluation,
All right,
otherwise
that's a lot
known
of
as
words.
splitting. Now,
Just say that from the beginning.
what exactly does this mean? It means that the instability and intensity in the relationship is caused by the contrasting ways the person treats their partner. One moment, they could be praising their partner, telling them that they are perfect and that they are everything they've ever wanted, aka idealization. And the next, they're talking down to them, treating them as if they mean nothing to them and are completely worthless, aka devaluation.
Right.
We see this throughout the
I call that
relationship with Mr.
manipulation.
Slave as he switches back and forth between praising Mr. Slave and tearing him down. Again, we'll see this in the future as well. In the next season, he is absolutely outraged that evolution is to be taught in his classroom due to his strong Christian beliefs, and reluctantly explains it to the children in an interesting way.
You're the retarded offspring of 5 monkeys having butt sex with a fish squirrel. Congratulations.
When he inevitably gets in trouble for this, the school puts
fucked up.
Richard Dawkins in his classroom to explain evolution. After another incident of Mr. Garrison completely denying evolution and again showing inappropriate anger, Dawkins begins to express his interest in him, asking to
Boy,
go
got
on a
shit
date.
on him.
Garrison immediately switches from outraged and defensive to soft-spoken and interested, accepting the date. Again, this is another example of the emotional instability. During dinner, Dawkins expresses how he wishes that Garrison were an atheist, to which Garrison responds with,
I'm not totally into the whole God thing.
At that exact moment, Garrison decides that he's now an atheist, immediately renouncing the beliefs he was fighting so passionately for earlier in the day. This is one of the many examples of arguably the most important characteristic in making our diagnosis.
It just sounds like he just trying to fucking fit in, bro. You know, it really sounds like he trying to fit in, like he wants to prove himself to everybody, like he wants to be loved and he wants to be liked. Because it just like, to me, it just seems like he didn't say how he really feel about his whole sexuality because he was scared of what people might think. So he faked and fronted to them, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like he said, he just went full atheist. Yeah, like how the hell you gonna love God just a second ago and then went full atheist? He thought, no, he wanted that D.
Identity disturbance with markedly or persistently unstable self-image or sense of self.
They say men lie.
Garrison's character is essentially defined by his frequent changes in identity. Not even counting the more minor identity changes, we've seen him as a straight man, a gay man, a trans woman, and now an atheist, all within a short time span.
Yeah,
As I said,
couple
whenever
years.
he adopts a new personality, he takes it to the extreme. These are all signs that Garrison lacks a sense of self. He doesn't know who he is, essentially living in a constant state of an identity crisis, always compensating for his lack of identity by becoming as obsessed with his new identity as someone could be. During the lesson in the next day's class, he makes sure to let his beliefs be known, telling the class that there is no God and chastising Stan when he asks if it's possible that there is a God, calling him some names that I'm unfortunately not allowed to say here. He even puts him in a dunce cap at the front of the class. He takes it so far that he's even able to convince Dawkins to team up with him to campaign against religion, eventually leading to a future society where there is no more religion. This is eventually reversed when Cartman makes a call to the past and Dawkins learns that Garrison had a sex change operation and he immediately leaves him.
Bro, you couldn't tell this ugly ass dude. This motherfucking girl has gray fucking hair that wraps around like this, bitch. You couldn't tell that was a guy.
As soon as he leaves,
You knew
Garrison,
that was a guy.
of course, immediately begins yelling both homophobic slurs and condemnation due to his atheism, once again showing the identity disturbance, emotional instability, and unstable relationships.
I think he just wants to hurt that person. I don't know if he actually believes it, though.
Then, in season 11, after a date gone wrong, he is once again enraged and decides that he hates men. For this one, I'm not going to directly say the criteria, I want you guys to try to pick up on it. Upon talking to a woman at his gym, he goes to a bar that ends up being a lesbian bar. He's flustered at first, but upon some convincing, he decides to give it a try. In class the next day, he seems very happy and explains to the class the situation. As we expect at this point, he then tries to be the most lesbian out of all the lesbians. Again, using absolutely outrageous stereotypes and statements about his newly found sexuality. He makes sure to remind everyone of the fact that he is a lesbian as much as possible and leads the charge
beating
in
up a
protecting
lesbian.
their bar after it was bought out. He starts an all-out war between the Persians and the lesbians, battling over the ownership of the bar.
God.
He ends up saving the bar in an epic parody of 300, and shockingly, he actually sticks to this new identity. So the criteria that I picked up on in this episode was definitely emotional instability, inappropriate rage, and identity disturbance. And you could also argue
Finna
for the
fight on
unstable
me,
relationships
scissoring
because
like
of
hell,
how his
boy.
relationships went with the other
He showed the what's that, splitting? No, scissor, ugly ass boy.
lesbians. So, finally, in the next season, he reflects on his sex change and decides that he no longer wants to be a woman once again. When he sees an opportunity to have the necessary organ grown using stem cells, he decides to go through with it. Wacky hijinks ensue throughout the episode as the mouse it was grown on escapes the lab. They eventually catch up to the mouse and he has the surgery done, once again becoming Mr. Garrison.
Bro, imagine being that mouse, bro. You did not want that shit grown on you, bro. Like, you know what I mean? That's fucked up, bro. He called him a dick rat.
He announces it to the school and immediately claims that he was never a woman, as you have to be able to have children to be a woman. When someone tells him that his wife can't have children because of cancer, he immediately makes a homophobic remark, leaving us with the final form of Mr. Garrison, a gay man that is also homophobic.
Well, then get an AIDS test, Thompson, because your wife's a dude.
What? That is crazy, bro. So he basically is like Uncle Ruckus, bro. A black man that hates black people. Just a walking, talking hypocrisy, bro. That's what he is. He's a fucking hypocrite, bro. Don't read. He says
When
South
diagnosing
Park.
someone with borderline personality disorder, they need to meet at least 5 of the diagnostic criteria. Just looking at the surface, we have already identified a pattern of 4 of these traits within Mr. Garrison, so now let's go back and see what we can find for the other traits. First, we have chronic feelings of emptiness.
Right.
While there's no direct evidence that Mr. Garrison feels empty inside, we can infer his feelings based on
Boy,
his
ain't that
actions.
empty, boy.
The
Fucking
majority
with
of his
Mr. Slave
actions are
ass.
pretty typical of someone attempting to fill a void within themselves, as his actions are incredibly reckless and self-centered. It feels like he is always on the hunt for something to
Oh, I remember what y'all was talking about, bro. When he was rolling around and then they got into that position. He's like, oh, we're scissoring.
fill that void, whether it be a new personality
I
or a
hope they
cause
don't
to fight for.
demonetize this.
So while it seems like his actions are related to an emptiness inside, there's not really any concrete evidence, so we'll leave this as a maybe right now. Next is impulsive behavior in at least 2 areas that are self-harming. This is another iffy one since we know that he is incredibly impulsive, but whether or not his actions are self-harming is up for debate. His actions don't really align with the examples given, but I still think you could argue that his impulsive actions are often self-harming. For example, his sex change was an impulsive move, and he regretted that by the end of the episode, so would that not be considered self-harming? It's up for debate, but for now we'll leave this as another maybe. Next is recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, which is pretty much a hard no since he really hasn't shown any sort of suicidal ideations throughout the show. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. We actually have hard evidence for this one, if you'll think back to earlier in the video when I mentioned his trip to his parents' house. We know he felt abandoned by his father as a child, believing that his father didn't love him. Now, whether or not these feelings of abandonment were valid doesn't really matter, because the abandonment can be either real or imagined.
Yeah.
Even though the logic
You know, he
behind
liked
it
to
is
imagine
questionable,
shit.
the abandonment was still real to Mr. Garrison, and these feelings of abandonment have undoubtedly carried over into his adult life. It can be seen when Richard Dawkins asked him out on a date, and he immediately said yes, despite hating him and everything he stood for just seconds earlier. Just the idea of someone being interested is enough for him to accept, since he is so used to those feelings of being abandoned. The same goes for when he
That's
is being
pretty deep,
broken
though.
up with, as he instantly becomes incredibly hateful and hurtful, likely because he is scared of being abandoned again.
Right.
So this one is a hard yes,
That
and
makes
that
sense.
allows us to officially diagnose Garrison with BPD.
That boy just
However,
needs some
there is
love,
one
boy.
more
Shit.
criteria that I haven't talked about yet that I found to be very interesting. The last trait is transient, stress-related paranoid ideation
Oh,
or
shit.
severe dissociative symptoms.
Oh, God.
Do you
bro,
guys
what?
see why that's so interesting to me? See, this one trait is what really brings everything full circle. At first, it seemed that the first diagnosis I made was only kind of related to this diagnosis, as it was likely that they stemmed from the same traumas from Garrison's childhood. However, with this, we can see that these two conditions are almost one and the same. His constant paranoia over being called gay, his inability to accept who he truly is, and his denial being so great that he created a separate personality to channel his gay feelings into. We haven't seen Mr. Garrison grow from DID to BPD, it was just the natural evolution of his character. That's why the dissociative personalities faded away as he was finally able to accept who he was. As soon as he didn't feel insecure with himself, they no longer needed to exist, and instead, they were replaced with the traits that we see now. The thing is, these traits have always existed inside of him. He was just too preoccupied with his fear and paranoia to showcase them. These two conditions built off of each other and took over when the other wasn't needed.
That's
almost
crazy.
Like some sort of twisted symbiotic relationship. And these can
Bro, I think, like he was saying, bro, that man was abandoned. That boy was lost, stressed, and test. I don't even know, with a vest. I don't even know, bro. Like, that man was stressed. That boy was lost. That boy had feelings of abandonment from his father not touching him. That's weird. That boy went through life as he was always old as fuck. Boy, that nigga ain't have hair on top of your head. That is enough to make you traumatized as a kid. If you growing a full ring around bald spot, bro, you're gonna get traumatized as a kid. He was made fun of, bro. And then he can't accept himself, bro. All of that, bro, is enough to really fuck you up, bro.
conditions built the
Telling you.
foundation for who Mr. Garrison would become, the president. But we're not going to talk about that because he's basically just Trump, so there's not really much to say there.
Yeah.
And if you still somehow are not fully convinced on my diagnosis, I will leave you with a final quote from the National Institute of Mental Health that can be used to basically summarize this entire video. People with borderline personality disorder may experience intense mood swings and feel uncertainty about how they see themselves. Their feelings for others can change quickly and swing from extreme closeness to extreme dislike. These changing feelings can lead to unstable relationships and emotional pain.
Wow.
People with borderline personality disorder also tend to view things in extremes, such as all good or all bad.
Right.
Their interests and values can change quickly, and they may act impulsively or recklessly.
Right.
And with
That's
that,
crazy.
we can conclusively say that we finally understand the complicated psychology of the most offensive character on TV.
Wow. Okay, Bloom, you deserve that, bro. You deserve that because it took a lot of trial and error, testing and besting and festing for you to make this damn video, bro. That was 32 minutes long. One, I want to say big shout out to you, bro. Shout out to you, Bloom, bro. And boy, that boy, Mr. Garrison. Let me just summarize your whole video, bro. I can summarize 32 minutes, bro, just for you, because you my boy. Mr. Garrison is fucked up. That's what he is, bro. Personality blind disorder. You're blind in one eye. You're gay on the other side of your face. That boy is just fucked up, period. It ain't about him being gay. He's just fucked up. Ain't about him being in love. He's fucked up. Fucked up.